The galaxy had known the Zarkali for centuries, giants of muscle and violence. They were conquerors, unmatched in physical strength, their names spoken with reverence and fear. In every war, they thrived on brute force, smashing through defenses with terrifying efficiency. They believed that dominance came through strength alone, and to them, humanity seemed like an amusing footnote, fragile creatures barely worthy of notice. But things had changed. Humanity, now spread across multiple star systems, had survived more than its fair share of trials. They weren't the biggest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced, but they were persistent, and in every encounter with the galaxy's fiercest enemies, they had adapted, overcome, and survived. They were becoming harder to ignore. The Zarkali Council, proud and arrogant, decided it was time to test this rising species, not in politics or diplomacy, not with fleets or weapons, but through sheer brute strength. If the humans could survive the Zarkali's arena, they would be acknowledged as worthy of existence. If they lost, they would be subjugated or eradicated, just like every other weaker species that had dared to stand against the Warlords. The challenge was issued through a galaxy-wide broadcast. The Zarkali ambassador standing on a raised platform, his massive form casting a long shadow across the hall. His muscles rippled beneath his armor, and his eyes gleamed with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Humans," the ambassador's voice boomed, "you are called to the arena. Bring your strongest. Bring your best. We shall see if your kind has earned its place among the stars, or if you are nothing more than frail beings who survive by accident." The message spread like wildfire across human space, reaching every colony, every station, and every outpost. Leaders from across the systems gathered to discuss their response. Some argued for diplomacy. Surely there was a way to avoid this unnecessary confrontation. Others believed it was a trap, an excuse to attack humanity regardless of the outcome. But one thing was clear: ignoring the challenge was not an option. In the end, the decision was unanimous. Humanity would fight, not just because it was expected, but because backing down now would mean setting a precedent. If they refused, the Zarkali and the rest of the galaxy would see them as weak. They couldn't afford that. Not now, not ever. And so, a team was assembled. They didn't just gather soldiers. They chose people who embodied every aspect of human endurance and strength. Special forces operatives, mixed martial artists, Olympic-level athletes, and extreme survivalists. Men and women who had spent their lives pushing the limits of what a human body and mind could endure. Among them was Captain Elias Voss, a towering figure with the calm demeanor of someone who had seen too many battles to be easily rattled. Voss had fought in Earth's darkest wars, leading teams through jungles, deserts, and frozen wastelands. He had survived against overwhelming odds time and time again, not because he was the strongest, but because he never gave up. He was exactly the kind of person the Zarkali couldn't understand, and that made him dangerous. The team trained relentlessly during the weeks leading up to their departure. They knew that brute force alone wouldn't be enough. The Zarkali were stronger, by a wide margin, but humans had something else: endurance, adaptability, and a stubborn refusal to quit. These were qualities the Zarkali didn't value, because they had never needed to. They would soon learn the truth. When the day of departure arrived, the human fighters boarded their ship in grim silence. There were no speeches, no fanfare, just a quiet understanding that this wasn't just a battle, it was a statement. They weren't going to fight for glory or trophies. They were going to prove once and for all that humanity belonged among the stars. The Zarkali homeworld was an unforgiving place. Harsh landscapes stretched beneath blood-red skies, with jagged mountains rising like the teeth of some ancient beast. At its center stood the arena, a colossal structure carved from black stone, surrounded by roaring Zarkali spectators. The walls were decorated with trophies from past battles, pieces of armor, broken weapons, and the bones of those who had fallen. When the human team arrived at the arena gates, the Zarkali ambassador greeted them with a sneer. "So you came after all," he rumbled, his deep voice filled with amusement. "I almost thought you wouldn't." Voss met the ambassador's gaze without flinching. "We're not in the habit of running," the ambassador chuckled. A low, rumbling sound. "Good. You'll make a fine addition to the collection." The rules of the contest were simple. There were no rules. It was a test of strength, endurance, and willpower. The fighters would face off in a series of brutal challenges, with the goal of proving their worth, or dying in the attempt. The Zarkali crowd roared as the gates to the arena opened, their anticipation palpable. They had seen countless battles over the years, and in every one the outcome had been the same. Their champion stood victorious, and the challengers lay broken and defeated. They expected this fight to be no different. The human fighters stood in a line, their expressions calm but focused. They weren't here to entertain, they were here to survive. Voss clenched his fists, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline as he sized up the competition. The Zarkali fighters were massive, each one a walking mountain of muscle and rage, but they weren't invincible, not by a long shot. As the first match was announced, a giant Zarkali warrior stepped forward, flexing his muscles and roaring at the crowd. He towered over the human fighter chosen to face him, a wiry woman named Reyes, known for her speed and precision. The crowd jeered, expecting a quick and brutal victory. Reyes stepped into the arena, her movements fluid and controlled. She didn't have the raw strength of her opponent, but she didn't need it. She had something far more dangerous, the ability to think on her feet. The Zarkali warrior charged, swinging his massive fists with the force of a wrecking ball. Reyes ducked and weaved, her movements a blur as she avoided each strike with ease. The crowd's jeers turned to murmurs of confusion. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. The warrior grew frustrated, his attacks becoming sloppy and predictable. That's when Reyes struck, quick, precise blows to the joints and pressure points. The Zarkali stumbled, his body struggling to keep up with the relentless assault. For the first time in a long while, the Zarkali crowd fell silent. The warrior roared in fury, throwing everything he had into one last desperate strike. Reyes dodged effortlessly, stepping behind him and delivering a final blow to the back of his knee. The giant fell to the ground, gasping for breath as the crowd looked on in stunned silence. Reyes stood over her opponent, her expression calm and unyielding. She hadn't beaten him with strength. She had beaten him with skill, endurance, and adaptability, and this was only the beginning. As the Zarkali warrior struggled to rise, Voss leaned toward his teammates, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "They thought this would be easy," he said quietly. One of his teammates chuckled. "Guess they've never met us before." The next match was announced, and the human fighters stepped forward, ready for the challenge. The crowd roared once more, but this time, there was a hint of uncertainty in their voices. The humans were just getting started. The black stone gates of the Zarkali arena slammed shut behind the human team with an ominous thud, sealing them inside the heart of their enemy's domain. Towering stands filled with thousands of Zarkali warriors surrounded them, their booming chants shaking the ground beneath the humans' feet. The sheer size and noise of the crowd were overwhelming, each warrior a giant in their own right, exuding an aura of primal brutality. The entire atmosphere reeked of arrogance. The Zarkali were here to witness a slaughter, not a competition. Voss and his team stood in formation on the arena floor, studying their surroundings with cold calculation. The human fighters weren't intimidated, though many of them were visibly tense. Reyes adjusted her gloves, her jaw tight, while a heavyweight boxer named Grayson rolled his shoulders, cracking his knuckles loudly enough to be heard over the distant cheers. Their confidence was quiet, unshakable. They knew this wasn't about impressing the crowd, it was about survival and winning, no matter the cost. A drumbeat echoed through the arena, and the Zarkali announcer's voice boomed across the airwaves. "Today, these fragile beings will meet the fury of the Zarkali. No weapons, no mercy. Only strength will determine who walks out alive." The crowd erupted into deafening cheers, and one of the human fighters, a military veteran named Vargas, muttered under his breath. "Friendly crowd, huh?" Voss smirked but kept his gaze forward. "Focus. If they think we're just meat for the grinder, let's make sure they choke on it." As the first match was announced, a hulking Zarkali fighter stomped into the arena, his armor adorned with scars from a dozen battles. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never tasted defeat. The crowd roared at his entrance, chanting his name. "Karag! Karag!" Karag stood at least 8 feet tall, his muscles rippling with every movement. He grinned down at the human fighters like a predator eyeing easy prey. The announcer's voice boomed again, filled with theatrical malice. "Step forward, human. Let the slaughter begin." Reyes, the quick-footed fighter who had taken down the first Zarkali in the previous round, stepped into the ring without hesitation. Her slim frame and smaller size earned sneers from the crowd, but she ignored them. Voss met her gaze from across the arena and gave her a single nod. She nodded back, rolling her neck and shaking out her hands, ready to dance with the giant. Karag's grin widened as he watched Reyes approach. "Is this your best?" he growled, his voice low and menacing. "I will break you in half before the first breath of battle is over." Reyes smirked. "Then you'd better move fast, big guy." The gong rang out, signaling the start of the fight. Karag lunged forward with astonishing speed for someone his size, his massive fist cutting through the air like a hammer. Reyes ducked low, narrowly avoiding the blow, and darted to the side. Karag's follow-up strike came just as fast, but Reyes spun away from it, using the giant's momentum against him. For the first 30 seconds, Karag threw everything he had at Reyes. Wild swings, bone-shattering kicks, and brutal charges, but every attack hit only air. Reyes was a blur, moving with impossible precision, her training and reflexes honed to perfection. The crowd, expecting a swift victory, grew restless as the seconds ticked by. Karag's frustration was evident in every heavy breath and clumsy swing. He was powerful, but he wasn't used to opponents who refused to stand still, and that was exactly what Reyes counted on. When Karag overextended with a heavy punch, Reyes saw her opening. She closed the distance in a heartbeat, striking the giant's exposed ribs with a rapid combination of elbows and kicks. Karag stumbled, grunting in pain as he struggled to regain his balance. Reyes pressed the attack, dancing around him like a shadow, her strikes relentless and precise. Voss watched from the sidelines, arms folded. "She's picking him apart," he murmured. Vargas nodded in approval. "Yeah, but he's still dangerous. One hit from that guy, and it's over." They weren't wrong. Karag, though clumsy and slow, was a force of nature. All he needed was one lucky hit, and Reyes would be done. But Reyes wasn't about to give him that chance. She dodged another wild swing and drove her knee into the back of Karag's leg, forcing the giant to kneel. The crowd gasped, stunned by what they were witnessing. A human, not with brute strength, but with finesse and endurance, was outmaneuvering one of their champions. It was unthinkable. Karag roared in fury, slamming both fists into the ground in frustration. But Reyes didn't let up. She danced around him, landing strike after strike, wearing the giant down. His breathing grew labored, his movements slower and more desperate. Finally, with one last spinning kick, Reyes knocked Karag to the ground. The giant collapsed with a thunderous crash, gasping for breath. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Reyes stood over her fallen opponent, breathing hard but victorious. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her fists in triumph. She simply looked down at Karag and said, "You never stood a chance." The crowd erupted into chaos, some cheering in disbelief, others howling in outrage. The Zarkali warriors were furious, their pride wounded by the unexpected defeat. But among the jeers, there were murmurs of respect. The humans were proving to be more than just fragile beings. They were fighters, survivors. As Reyes returned to the human team, Grayson gave her a grin. "Not bad for a fragile being, huh?" Reyes smirked, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Told you I'd dance circles around him." Voss clapped her on the shoulder. "Good work. But don't get comfortable. This was just the beginning." The next match was announced, and Grayson stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with a grin. "My turn." The Zarkali fighter who entered the arena to face him was even larger than Karag, his body a mountain of muscle and rage. But Grayson wasn't intimidated. He rolled his shoulders, bouncing lightly on his feet. The gong rang out again, and the two fighters charged at each other with the force of freight trains. This time it wasn't finesse or strategy. It was pure, raw strength. Grayson met the Zarkali's blows head-on, his fists colliding with bone and muscle in a brutal exchange. Every punch was a shockwave, every impact a test of endurance. The crowd roared with excitement as the two giants clashed in a brutal contest of strength. But what the Zarkali didn't realize, what they couldn't understand, was that humans didn't fight just with muscle. They fought with heart, with grit, with the knowledge that pain was temporary and victory was forever. Grayson took hit after hit, but he kept coming. No matter how hard the Zarkali fighter struck, Grayson refused to fall, and with every punch he landed, the Zarkali warrior grew more frustrated, more desperate. The fight dragged on, longer than any of the Zarkali had expected. Sweat dripped from Grayson's brow, his knuckles bruised and bloody, but his grin never wavered. And when the Zarkali warrior finally faltered, exhausted, gasping for breath, Grayson delivered the final blow, sending his opponent crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted once more, but this time there was no outrage, only stunned respect. Voss smiled, watching as his team slowly but surely began to earn their place in the arena. "They thought this would be easy," he murmured. "They thought wrong," Reyes added with a grin. The humans were just getting started. The roar of the Zarkali crowd echoed across the arena as the second match came to an end. Grayson's opponent lay sprawled on the ground, unconscious and battered, while the human fighter wiped blood from his split lip with the back of his hand. The humans had won 2 rounds, an outcome no one in the audience had expected, but the atmosphere had shifted. The jeering and mockery had given way to confusion, and, in some corners of the arena, grudging respect. The Zarkali warlords, seated on raised thrones overlooking the battleground, exchanged uneasy glances. What had begun as a show of dominance was turning into something far more serious. Voss stood at the edge of the human team, his arms crossed as he observed the crowd. "They're not laughing anymore," he muttered. Reyes, still catching her breath from her earlier match, grinned. "Guess they didn't expect us to last this long. They expected us to break," Voss replied quietly, "but they don't understand what we're made of." The Zarkali announcer's booming voice interrupted their thoughts. "The next trial will test not only strength but endurance. Let us see if these humans can endure the heat of the torrid fields." The gates on the far side of the arena groaned open, revealing a new section of the battlefield. Blistering waves of heat rolled across the sands, the shimmering air distorting the landscape beyond. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground like teeth, and molten streams of lava snaked through the terrain, glowing a dangerous red. The Zarkali warriors grinned, baring sharp teeth. They thrived in harsh environments, their bodies built to withstand extremes. The humans, they believed, would crumble beneath the heat. The announcer continued, "The rules are simple. Survive and reach the other side. But remember, there will be no mercy." Voss turned to his team, his gaze calm but firm. "This is what they want. Break us down. Make us quit, but they don't know us." Grayson cracked his knuckles again, still riding the high of his last fight. "Let's show them what endurance really looks like." The human fighters stepped into the torrid fields together, the heat hitting them like a physical wall. The air was thick and heavy, making every breath a struggle. Sweat began to bead on their skin almost immediately, dripping down their faces and soaking their clothes. Voss led the way, his gaze sharp and focused. They moved carefully across the burning sands, avoiding the streams of lava, and keeping a wary eye on the jagged rocks that littered the landscape. It wasn't just the heat they had to worry about. Zarkali hunters lurked among the stones, waiting to ambush anyone who showed signs of weakness. The first ambush came quickly. A group of Zarkali warriors leapt from behind a cluster of rocks, their massive bodies glistening with sweat but moving with terrifying speed. The humans scattered, each fighter engaging an opponent with practiced precision. Voss ducked beneath a wild swing from a Zarkali hunter, driving his elbow into the alien's ribs with a satisfying crunch. Grayson tackled another warrior, the two of them rolling across the sand in a flurry of fists and snarls. Reyes moved like a dancer, slipping past her opponent's defenses and landing a rapid series of strikes to his knees and throat. But the heat took its toll quickly. Every movement felt heavier, every breath harder to take. The Zarkali, used to fighting in these conditions, pushed harder, hoping to exhaust the humans. It was a battle not just of strength but of endurance. Who could last the longest in the unforgiving heat? Voss wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at his teammates. They were holding their own, but the strain was beginning to show. Reyes's movements had slowed, her breathing ragged. Even Grayson, built for brawling, was struggling to keep up the pace, and yet none of them showed any signs of quitting. The Zarkali hunters began to grow frustrated. They had expected the humans to falter, to collapse under the heat and pressure, but the humans kept fighting, kept moving, refusing to give in. They didn't fight with the brute force of the Zarkali. They fought with precision, with determination, and with a kind of stubborn resilience that the Zarkali had never encountered before. Voss blocked a punch from his opponent, twisting the Zarkali's arm and sending him sprawling into the sand. He turned to check on the others, just in time to see Reyes land a final blow to her opponent, dropping him to his knees. Grayson slammed his shoulder into another warrior, sending the alien crashing into a stream of molten lava. The crowd roared, a mix of shock and disbelief. The humans, against all odds, were still standing, panting and drenched in sweat. The human fighters regrouped, their expressions grim but determined. The heat burned their skin and every muscle ached, but they weren't done yet. They would not stop. Not here, not ever. Voss glanced toward the far end of the torrid fields, where the exit loomed like a distant mirage. "We keep moving," he said, his voice low but firm. "They want us to quit. Let's disappoint them." Grayson grinned through the sweat pouring down his face. "I love disappointing people." They pressed on, each step heavier than the last. The Zarkali hunters regrouped, watching from the shadows with a mixture of frustration and confusion. They had fought countless opponents over the years, but none had endured like the humans. None had kept going, even when every step felt like a death sentence. As the human fighters reached the halfway point, another wave of Zarkali warriors emerged from the rocks, desperate to stop them before they could reach the finish line. The battle erupted once more, fists and claws clashing in a brutal contest of strength and endurance. But the outcome was different this time. The humans didn't just fight, they adapted. They used the terrain to their advantage, forcing the Zarkali into positions where their size and strength became a liability. They fought smarter, not harder, conserving their energy and outlasting their opponents. Voss ducked beneath a wild swing, driving his knee into his opponent's gut and sending the Zarkali crashing into the sand. Reyes swept the legs out from under another warrior, pinning him to the ground with a chokehold. Grayson, grinning like a madman, tackled his opponent into a lava stream, emerging victorious and covered in soot. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the humans fought their way to the end of the torrid fields. They had not only survived, they had thrived. They had turned the Zarkali's own arena into a playground for human endurance. As the human fighters reached the exit, panting and exhausted but triumphant, Voss turned to the crowd and raised his fist. "You wanted strength?" he shouted, his voice carrying across the arena. "This is strength." The Zarkali warriors stared down at them, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. They had never seen anything like it. Fighters who refused to quit, who thrived under pressure, and who turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. As the human team regrouped, Reyes shot Voss a tired grin. "Think they've had enough?" Voss chuckled. "Not yet, but they will." The humans weren't just here to survive, they were here to win, and the Zarkali were starting to realize that they had underestimated their opponents in the worst possible way. The Zarkali warlords sat stiffly on their thrones, the triumph in their expressions replaced with something closer to concern. The humans were not only holding their ground, they were getting stronger with every round. What the Zarkali had mistaken for fragility was proving to be a dangerous kind of strength, and worst of all, the crowd was starting to sense it too. Murmurs spread through the arena as the spectators, once filled with mocking laughter, began to watch the humans with a mixture of fascination and respect. Voss wiped the sweat from his brow, his team regrouping around him as they caught their breath from the grueling heat trial. Reyes leaned on her knees, breathing heavily, but the fire in her eyes was still there. Grayson stretched his shoulders, grinning as if the battle had been nothing more than a workout. Vargas, quiet and focused, checked the bandages on his arms, preparing for whatever came next. "They're not happy," Reyes muttered, glancing toward the warlord's platform. Voss followed her gaze, his lips curling into a small grin. "Good. Let them squirm." Before the humans could fully recover, the announcer's voice boomed again, reverberating across the arena. "You have shown strength, humans. You have survived the heat, but endurance alone will not be enough. Now you must face the trials of chaos." Massive gates on all sides of the arena groaned open, and new obstacles flooded the battlefield. Razor-sharp winds whipped through the air, carrying clouds of dust that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Platforms rose from the ground, forming uneven terrain, while jagged rocks tumbled down slopes, creating hazardous traps. And as if that weren't enough, streams of water burst from hidden ducts, turning patches of ground into slick, treacherous mud. The Zarkali warriors stood at the ready, their hulking forms outlined by the swirling dust and debris. The warlords had unleashed the full chaos of their homeworld on the humans, hoping to overwhelm them with an unpredictable environment. The message was clear. Brute strength alone wouldn't win this fight. The humans would need to adapt or die. Grayson let out a low whistle as he eyed the shifting battlefield. "They're throwing everything at us now." Voss nodded, scanning the arena. "Good. The harder they push, the more we show them what we can do." The trial began without warning. Zarkali warriors surged forward, their enormous frames slicing through the dust storm with terrifying speed. They moved like predators, navigating the treacherous terrain with ease. The humans, however, weren't far behind. Voss barked orders as the team spread out, each fighter instinctively adjusting to the new conditions. Reyes, light on her feet, leapt onto the shifting platforms, using her agility to stay above the fray. Grayson, built for power, planted his feet in the mud, absorbing the impact of every attack and turning it back on his opponents. Vargas slipped through the chaos like a ghost, ambushing Zarkali fighters from the shadows of dust clouds. The fight was brutal. Claws clashed against fists, and mud flew through the air as bodies collided. But something strange began to happen. The longer the trial went on, the more the humans adapted. They learned to anticipate the terrain's movements, using the unstable platforms and slick ground to their advantage. They worked together, each fighter compensating for the other's weaknesses, moving as a single, unstoppable unit. A Zarkali warrior lunged at Grayson, his claws aiming for the human's throat, but Grayson was ready. He sidestepped the attack, planting his foot in the mud and driving his shoulder into the warrior's chest. The Zarkali stumbled, momentarily off balance. In an instant, Reyes was there, delivering a swift kick to the back of the warrior's knee, dropping him to the ground. The crowd roared in disbelief. They had expected the humans to falter, to be overwhelmed by the chaotic environment, but instead, the humans were thriving. Voss ducked beneath a swing from a towering Zarkali fighter, his movements fluid and precise. He felt the shift in the ground beneath him, knew a platform was rising, and used it to propel himself upward. With a powerful leap, he tackled the Zarkali warrior to the ground, pinning him beneath the weight of his own armor. The human fighters weren't just enduring, they were winning. The Zarkali warlords watched in stunned silence as their champions fell, one by one, to the relentless human team. What had started as a spectacle of dominance was turning into a humiliation. The humans had taken everything the Zarkali had thrown at them and turned it into a weapon. Grayson slammed his fist into the face of another Zarkali, knocking him unconscious with a single, brutal punch. Reyes, perched on a platform high above the battlefield, surveyed the scene with a grin. "I think they're starting to get the message." Voss gave a quick nod, his focus never wavering. "Let's make sure it sticks." The humans pressed their advantage, pushing the Zarkali warriors back toward the edges of the arena. The once confident aliens were now on the defensive, their movements growing sluggish and desperate. They had never encountered anything like this before, opponents who not only refused to quit, but got stronger with every challenge. One of the Zarkali warriors, panting heavily, staggered toward the center of the battlefield, his claws dragging through the mud. His comrades hesitated, uncertainty flashing across their faces. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the Zarkali were beginning to understand what it meant to fight against humans. Voss stood at the center of the arena, mud dripping from his arms, his gaze locked on the Warlords' platform. "You thought strength was all that mattered," he shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "But strength is nothing without the will to endure." The crowd, once so sure of the outcome, fell silent. The Zarkali warlords leaned forward in their seats, their expressions unreadable. They had challenged humanity to prove its worth, and now they were watching, helpless, as their champions were bested by a species they had considered inferior. The final wave of Zarkali fighters charged, desperate to salvage their honor. But the humans were ready. They moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, each fighter anticipating the next move, adapting to the shifting battlefield as if they had trained for it their entire lives. Grayson tackled one of the charging warriors, pinning him to the ground with a thunderous crash. Reyes swept the legs out from under another, delivering a sharp kick to his ribs as he fell. Vargas, silent and efficient, took down two opponents with a series of brutal strikes to their pressure points. And Voss, standing at the heart of the battlefield, faced off against the last remaining Zarkali warrior. The two locked eyes, the air between them heavy with tension. The Zarkali growled low in his throat, his claws flexing. Voss cracked his knuckles. "Come on then, let's see what you've got." The Zarkali lunged, but Voss was faster. He sidestepped the attack, driving his fist into the warrior's side with enough force to crack ribs. The Zarkali stumbled, gasping for breath. Voss didn't wait. He followed up with a swift kick to the warrior's knee, dropping him to the ground. The crowd erupted in chaos as the last Zarkali fighter hit the mud, defeated. Voss stood over him, breathing hard but unbroken. He raised his fist toward the warlord's platform, his voice ringing through the arena. "You wanted a fight? You got one, and we're just getting started." The silence that followed was deafening. The Zarkali warlords sat frozen, their pride shattered. And the humans, they stood victorious. The arena had fallen into an eerie silence, the crowd stunned by what they had witnessed. The Zarkali warriors, once the undisputed champions of physical dominance, lay in the mud, defeated by human fighters who had outlasted, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed them. The warlords sat rigid on their thrones, their expressions a mix of disbelief, confusion, and, most troubling for them, respect. Voss stood at the center of the battlefield, mud-streaked and bloodied, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Around him, Reyes, Grayson, and Vargas regrouped, their bodies battered but unbowed. They had made it this far, and yet the hardest part was still ahead. The Zarkali were known for their unyielding pride, and the humans knew that the warlords would not let this insult go unanswered. As if on cue, the Zarkali announcer's voice thundered across the arena. "You have fought well, humans, but the final trial awaits. Now, you will face our greatest champion, the undefeated, the unbreakable, the embodiment of Zarkali strength, Kronak the Conqueror." The gates at the far end of the arena groaned open, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of something massive. The crowd roared with renewed energy, chanting the name of their champion in unison. "Kronak! Kronak! Kronak!" Voss turned toward the gate, his jaw tightening as the hulking figure of Kronak emerged. The Zarkali champion was unlike anything they had seen before, nearly 10 feet tall, with muscles that seemed to ripple beneath his armor like coiled steel cables. His skin was marked with countless scars, each one a testament to a victory earned. In one hand he carried a jagged spear, and in the other, a massive shield that looked more like a slab of stone. Grayson let out a low whistle. Well, that's a big boy. Reyes shot Voss a sidelong glance. You thinking what I'm thinking? Voss nodded grimly. Yeah, this is going to hurt. Kronak strode to the center of the arena, his every step shaking the ground. He surveyed the humans with a look of amused disdain, as if they were insects beneath his notice. When he spoke, his voice was a deep rumble, like distant thunder. You have fought well, little ones, but this is where it ends. None can stand against me. Voss met Kronak's gaze, his eyes steady. We're not here to stand, we're here to fight. The crowd roared in approval, eager to witness the final clash. The gong sounded, signaling the start of the match, and Kronak moved with surprising speed for someone his size. He swung his spear in a wide arc, aiming to crush the humans with a single blow. Voss dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike, while Grayson charged forward, his fists raised. Kronak turned with lightning speed, slamming his shield into Grayson's chest and sending him flying backward with bone-crunching force. Reyes darted in from the side, her movements a blur, aiming a kick at Kronak's knee. But the champion was ready. He twisted, catching her leg mid-strike and hurling her across the arena like a ragdoll. Vargas moved silently through the dust, trying to find an opening, but Kronak's eyes were sharp. He spun, slamming the butt of his spear into Vargas's ribs and knocking the wind out of him. Within moments, the human team lay sprawled across the arena floor, gasping for breath. Kronak stood over them, his expression a mixture of triumph and disdain. This is what you bring to challenge me? He growled. You are weak. Voss coughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. You have no idea what weak means. With a groan of effort, Voss forced himself to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest. Grayson, Reyes, and Vargas followed suit, each of them battered and bleeding but standing nonetheless. The sight of them, broken but unyielding, sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Kronak narrowed his eyes. You should stay down. Voss shook his head, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You first. The champion snarled, raising his spear for a killing blow. But this time the humans were ready. They moved as one, a blur of coordinated motion, each of them playing to their strengths. Reyes darted in first, feinting left before landing a sharp kick to Kronak's wrist, forcing him to drop the spear. Grayson followed up with a devastating uppercut to Kronak's jaw, staggering the giant. Vargas, slipping behind the champion, delivered a precise strike to the back of Kronak's knee, forcing him to kneel, and Voss, with every ounce of strength he had left, tackled the giant shield from Kronak's grasp and hurled it across the arena. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their undefeated champion, Kronak the Conqueror, knelt in the mud, disarmed and gasping for breath. But the humans weren't finished. Voss stepped forward, grabbing Kronak by the front of his armor and pulling him close. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit, Voss growled, his voice low and fierce. It's about how many times you can get hit and still keep going. Kronak stared at him, wide-eyed, as if seeing humanity for the first time. Then slowly, the Zarkali champion nodded. You are strong. Voss released him, and Kronak rose to his feet, towering over the humans but no longer looking down on them. He raised his massive hand, and to the astonishment of everyone in the arena, offered it to Voss. Voss clasped Kronak's hand in a firm grip, a gesture of mutual respect. The crowd, stunned into silence, slowly began to cheer. It started as a low rumble, but soon it grew into a roar, filling the arena with a deafening sound. The Zarkali warlords stood from their thrones, their expressions no longer filled with arrogance but with respect and admiration. They had come expecting to crush a weak species, but instead, they had witnessed something far greater, the unbreakable spirit of humanity. As the cheers of the crowd echoed through the arena, Voss turned to his team, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. They thought they'd break us, he said. Grayson chuckled, wiping blood from his lip. Guess they've never met a human before. Reyes grinned. Damn right. Vargas nodded silently, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. The Zarkali announcer's voice rang out one final time. The trial is over. Humanity has proven its strength, not through power alone but through endurance, unity, and will. They stand not as challengers but as equals. The crowd roared in approval, and the warlords nodded their agreement. What had started as a battle for survival had become the beginning of a new alliance, a partnership built on mutual respect and hard-won trust. As the human fighters made their way toward the exit, Voss glanced back at Kronak, who gave him a small, respectful nod. See you around, Voss muttered, a grin spreading across his face. And with that, the humans left the arena, not as defeated challengers, but as victors. They had faced the galaxy's strongest, and they had won, not just with fists, but with heart. The warlords would never forget the day they learned what it meant to be human.